Hello and welcome to this presentation about internal documentation. The intended audience for this is Year 11 Computing students, Units 1 and 2, and Year 12 Computing students in Software Development for VCE. If you don't know me, my name is Mr. O'Mara and this is what I teach. So, the VCE study design tells us that we want to know about the purposes of internal documentation, including explaining and justifying data and code choices, how it's useful for code maintenance, and placeholder comments for future development, also known as Stubs. So, that's our learning intention and our success criteria. Let's look at what we already know. So, obviously you can't do this activity with me because it's just a video, but you probably know that internal documentations are comments that we write within the code. So most software projects come with a great deal of external documentation, and in VCE we write a great deal of that, but this is stuff that actually goes into the code, and there are any number, I think there's about 3 main categories of reasons that we use it, and I kind of wrote it reluctantly to start with, and I paid the price for that. I'm actually a big believer in internal documentation, particularly in the age of AI. I find it useful to get the AI to tell me what it thinks that things do, and when it generates code to get it to include internal documentation so I can actually work with the code. So, what do we mean by it? Well, we mean comments and notes written inside the source code of a program. So it's written in there amongst the actual executable code, but it in itself is not executable. It doesn't affect how the program runs. So it is there purely for humans. It is there for you to read and for other people to read and for future you to read so that you actually understand what's going on with it. I would say there's a kind of a sweet spot with it, but actually it's not all that hard to determine. If in doubt, write more. You know, you can always skim through it. It's going to be read a lot more times than it's going to be written, so it's worth being clear about what's happening with your internal documentation. Why do we do it? Well, it makes the code easier to read and maintain. When we're in the zone coding, it's very easy to think, oh yeah, I don't need to write this up. It's perfectly obvious what this does, particularly if we're in good habits, we're using good variable names, we're using good function names, we've got a nice sensible flow to everything. It seems pretty straightforward. Still worth writing. It helps other developers and your future self. Ultimately, you want to be working on stuff with other people, or at least you want to be able to. I certainly, you know, my other person I work with is future me, and I'm not always as kind to future me as I should be. And in a professional environment where I was coding with other people, I would really have to lift my game. And it reduces errors when updating or debugging the code, so that you can actually go through and just go, oh yeah, that's what that does. You know, it's easier to fix something if you fully comprehend how it works. So, with your internal documentation on your SAT, and this is aimed at the Year 12 students, you actually need to have quite a lot of internal documentation in it, and it's much easier if you write it as you go. So, first of all, you need to say what the functionality of the modules are, or is, and that's much easier. Lots of people do that. That feels pretty easy. You know, this is the bit that gets the user input and validates it. This next bit probably feels a little bit laborious, but if you want to get your highest possible marks, then you need to include this. So you need to say, identify data types used and explain why this data type was chosen in this situation. So for instance, I'm using an integer because I'm collecting an age and I just want it as a whole number. I don't have any need to know decimal numbers and I want to use it mathematically. And that's why you use that. So there's some things you might mention. Identify data structures and explain why this structure was chosen. So, you know, why did you choose a one-dimensional array or a two-dimensional array or an associative array? Put it in here. This is, I don't know that you would necessarily do this in a professional environment, but it's something that the study design asks for. Was that it? Oh no, there's more. Data sources used, such as a plain text file, CSV, database records. To get the highest mark in your SAT, you will actually be getting data from an external source rather than just all stuff that's hard-coded in. So if you're aiming that high, then you want to be talking about what you're using and why you're using it. And finally, code structures, and explain why this code structure was chosen. And I think this is really the easiest one, particularly for selection. We only ever really do selection because we want to have the option to do different things in different circumstances, and repetition because we want to repeat something a number of times or while or until a condition is true. So I think that last one's actually pretty easy to do. I actually think the one before, why you're getting information from a database records, I think is pretty straightforward. You know what I didn't mention in there is XML, so I do need to tidy that up. So that's for those of you doing the SAT this year. Let's go have a look at some. Let's have a little field trip, shall we? So this is an example in JavaScript. You'll see that the comments are written in two main ways. That's a block comment there, which is /**, and then we've got a star on each line and // at the end. So that's like for a paragraph. And down here, we've got //. It is different in JavaScript than it is to, I think PHP is actually more like JavaScript. Python uses a lot of hashes. I can't remember how it does a block quote. CSS has a different quoting system than HTML. This stuff's all easy enough to find. So here we go. This is the module. Here's what it does. Here's the data source. Here's why we're using the data source. Here's what this does. We're using a book object from the inventory because we're using a string for alphanumeric, and so forth. Yes, it's a pain to write, but it's an investment in the future usability of this code, and also it's an investment in you doing well in your task. So, another reason that we use internal documentation is to assist us with code maintenance. It makes it easier to go back and update and work with code that is properly documented. It explains complex code logic. Most people think their code makes perfect sense, and it probably does to you in the moment that you're creating it. However, you're being kinder to yourself and to other people if you explain it as well. It explains context for code implementation, like why did you use a JSON here? Why is this parameter? Why is this query parameterized, for instance? It's not necessarily going to be obvious to people. No harm in making it explicit. It assists other developers in understanding code quickly, and it supports future code maintenance and modification, which brings us, oh there you go, and facilitates knowledge transfer between team members. So the person you're working with, and this might be something for people in year 11 who'll do your innovative solution, that it's easier for your team members to work with the code if you've written sensible internal documentation. Then they don't have to come and get you to laboriously explain it to them. So that kind of brings us to what a stub is. A stub is basically indicating where there's an incomplete section of code, and it's a note for yourself to go back and fix this. It's marking an area that needs future enhancement, so it might not need to be completely written, it might just need to be worked on, and it gives us context. So we might, back when I worked in software development, we would always say, oh, well, we're going to pick that up in the next version. Well, you know what, you might be working on the next version, and it helps people communicate. So what does it look like? Well, two conventions that are useful to us is to do. So this is stuff that's, down the track. I'm putting this here with a to do. And the next one is fix me. So there's some sort of error there. So those are two places where we use stubs. So let's see what we know. First up, I'm going to get you to tell me what a stub is. And second up, I'm going to get you to share two reasons why we use internal documentation. And once we've done that, that's the end of this presentation.